Tonight I want to read to you from a very dear favorite old book called Foursquare by Grace Richmond. This is the experience of Mary Fletcher and a number of her friends hearing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time in concert. Mary had heard that Beethoven Ninth Symphony before, once in her life, under circumstances entirely different, with a party of schoolgirls, chaperoned by a teacher, boxes of chocolates in their laps, subdued whisperings on their tongues. Mary had supposed she had listened to the greatest music in the world. Her program had so informed her, and her teacher had attempted to prepare her and the rest for the hearing of the imperishable masterpiece, though at certain points in the rendition she had experienced something approaching the thrill she knew she ought to feel. For the most part, she was secretly wishing things to come to a conclusion. It was really only when the climax arrived at the very end, with chorus and orchestra and soloist pouring out their utmost in the hymn to joy, and the audience rising spontaneously to its feet, that Mary and the other schoolgirls quite understood that it had been a great hour. As they later emerged into the street, they were saying to one another, "Wasn't it perfectly wonderful?" So it had been. But it was more than doubtful, if they had known it. Perhaps Mary herself was the only one who even dimly comprehended that they hadn't known it, or guessed the reason why. But she knew now. Between that day and this had lain experience of struggle and pain and life. And he who listens with understanding to the Ninth Symphony must have known these, not vicariously, but for himself. Throughout the marvelous first moment, she sat with head bent and eyes closed, letting the waves break over her, every nerve strung to tensity. There were moments when she felt the grandeur of the theme unbearable, when she lived and breathed with the composer in his suffering. The words of Richard Wagner interpreting the movement printed themselves on her brain. Oh yes, she knew all about it. Power, resistance, to strive, to long, to hope, almost to attain, again to vanish, to search for anew, to struggle again. Small wonder that in the listening she lost all sense of time and space. All that she knew was the sounds that beat upon her ears, the reaction of her whole being to the all but intolerable stimulus of those anguished violins. The rest was easier to bear. Relief came in the second movement. Peace in the third. With the beginning of the fourth, pain cried aloud again, a cry of disappointment, imperfect understanding. It made one realize how like life it all was, with no rock upon which to set one's foot. But then came the hymn to joy, with orchestra and chorus lifting the glorious tones to the vast roof. Once again Mary, with an audience on fire, rose to her feet. Tears of joy indeed at the beauty and might of that outburst of emotion filling her eyes, her heart beating wildly. Beside her rose Mark Fenn, and on her other side Guy Carter was being helped to his feet by Rose. The boy was crying too, trying his soldier best not to sob. Mary put out one hand and seized his and pressed it as tight as she could with a convulsive grip his fingers took of hers. Then she looked around at Mark and met his steady gray eyes and saw tears there too, quite because she couldn't help it. Her other hand touched his and found instant response. For one moment the three stood linked, gazing toward the orchestra, while the final glory of the hymn surged into their souls, unconscious of all the world outside that magic space. Then it was all over. The applause, thunderous, deafening, began, and the hands dropped apart. Such hours come only now and then in lifetimes, and each of these three recognized that this had been supremely one of these. If it had been raised to its highest power by the human companionship throughout the experience, only one of the three, perhaps, was fully conscious of that significance.